Good evening. We're here at the ABC affiliate in Dallas, WFAA, because in several hours the remaining Democratic candidates will join us here for a nationally televised debate which to all intents and purposes puts them together for the last time before Super Tuesday, next Tuesday, when 11 states hold primaries or caucuses. And we say the remaining candidates because the senator from Nebraska, Bob Kerrey, has decided to retire from the field. We're going to begin tonight with his departure. Here's ABC's Jack Smith.
Today, speaking to friends and supporters, Bob Kerrey was confident.
The only unelectable politician running for President of the United States is George Bush.
Today, Bob Kerrey was committed.
For me, the fight simply is going to move on to new arenas.
Today, Bob Kerrey was humorous.
Post-mortems? Are you a journalist or a mortician here?
In other words, today, Bob Kerrey was everything he'd failed to be on the campaign trail. On paper, he looked like just the sort of new Democrat to beat George Bush, a Vietnam War hero and a businessman who'd be immune from the weaknesses that Republicans had successfully exploited in past Democratic nominees. But Kerrey was inexperienced and his campaign sometimes disorganized. Furthermore, his main issue, health care, was stolen by everyone else. And too often, he was a rambling and incoherent stump speaker who failed to articulate a message.
Voters didn't understand what they were voting for. There were too many different things, and there wasn't one thing that they understood about Bob Kerrey. That was his problem.
As he headed back to Nebraska, the man who looked so good on paper became a campaign casualty because he failed to connect where it counts, with voters. Jack Smith, ABC News, Washington.
That observation of not quite knowing who or what they might be voting for was a problem for Kerrey ever since he rather impulsively, many believe, got into the race. There are so many questions which remain unresolved for voters about many of the candidates. In the case of Bill Clinton, our exit polls in Georgia on Tuesday night told us that 21% of the Democrats are still concerned about his record on the draft during the war in Vietnam. And in the case of Paul Tsongas, 19% said they are worried that the cancer he had in the early 80s could return. We put that question to our medical editor, Dr. Tim Johnson.
Just 6 years ago, Paul Tsongas was critically ill with a lymphoma, cancer of the lymphatic system, which is essential for fighting disease and infection.
In December of 1985, he had been very sick for several months, and if he did not respond quickly and completely to the therapy being instituted at that time, he probably would have died within several months.
The treatment proposed for Tsongas at Boston's Dana-Farber Cancer Institute is known as autologous bone marrow transplant. Some of the patient's own bone marrow is first removed and stored for safekeeping. The rest of the marrow is destroyed when the patient then receives 5 days of intensive chemotherapy and radiation designed to kill all cancer cells in the body. After this treatment, the stored bone marrow is given back to the patient as a transfusion. For Tsongas, the treatment worked. There is no doubt about his current general health. He swims every day, and doctors have placed no limits on any activity.
For a 51-year-old American, one would have to put him way ahead of the pack in terms of cardiovascular status, general underlying health. He's in exuberant health.
But could Tsongas's cancer return? Half of all lymphoma patients who go through bone marrow transplants will have a relapse in the first year or two. But current data indicates that if the patient makes it past those critical years, like Paul Tsongas, the chance of recurrence drops rapidly toward zero.
He has remained free of disease for so long, now 5.5 years since his transplant. I think the possibility remains, but it must be extremely remote.
Senator Tsongas now undergoes regular checkups, including a very sophisticated new test that can detect just one cancer cell in every 1 million normal cells. So far, everything is negative, which means that Paul Tsongas can probably be declared cancer-free with more certainty than any other candidate. Dr. Timothy Johnson, ABC News, New York.
The next 5 days in this campaign are as rigorous as any of the candidates have faced up until now, with so many primaries producing so much potential support. You let down now at your peril. Which brings us to the next big prize, Texas. The candidate who wins here, Republican or Democrat, gets a lot of publicity and a lot of delegates to support him at the political convention this summer. And Texans need to be convinced. First, this is not New Hampshire. The landscape here is marked by modest signs of recovery. There hasn't been much campaigning here, and a lot of Texans are just beginning to focus. Not far from Dallas, the mayor of Flower Mound, Gary Acker.
We're probably inclined to be more concerned about the local scene than we are the national scene.
A lot of people here believe that all the candidates cut and fit their campaign message too much to suit the local scene.
They kind of say what they have to say, whatever
vote they need to get done.
Moreover, the mud-covered governor's race here 2 years ago has left many Texas citizens thinking that perhaps all politicians are a lesser form of life.
Well, you're an easy sell, I'll tell you.
Linda Price lives in Grapevine, Texas. She owns a gift shop. Her husband, John, is a pilot.
I'm tired of our politicians being laughingstocks. I'm tired of character being reflected to the rest of the world that isn't necessarily the American ethic.
In 1992, this place which George Bush calls home is his to lose. Still, for the Texas vote, he and the other candidates will have to battle their way through some pretty heavy-duty cynicism. Phyllis Brown works for the IRS.
You know, they all say one thing when they're trying to get elected, and then they forget it 2 years down the road. And then all of a sudden they remember it 7 or 8 months before election time.
Among the Democratic candidates trying to make an impression here, the polls suggest that Bill Clinton is currently the favorite. Paul Tsongas isn't really familiar yet. Many people still call him Paul Tsongas. But he's making headway. As for the issues, Vicki and Byron Fry live in Euless, Texas. He's the assistant fire chief, and she manages a convenience store. She and her husband worry about crime and growing children.
The answer to crime is education. One of the big solutions to the problem is we're going to have to get the families back together as families.
Yeah, right.
John Price worries about health care.
We need to look at the possibility of a national health care program because health care is so expensive, people can't afford it anymore.
Linda Price believes that money is the root of many problems.
I think if we could get the national debt under control, that a lot of other things would solve itself.
And they do, after all, have something in common with New Hampshire. A nagging concern that however much they care about any particular issue, the politicians may not be able to deliver.
I have yet seen anybody really take a stance on what they believe is right. They're too busy attacking each other and pulling each other's hair rather than attacking the issues. I don't know, you get frustrated after a while.
A little later, we'll look at how the primary debate can change a whole campaign. On the American agenda tonight, the struggle to teach black